If you took out the T in Queens of the Monsters, you could have Qom, the Iranian city from which Ayatollah Khomeini emerged.
Okay.
You sure could.
Yeah, you sure could.
Are we gonna have a cold open?
Yes,
to
it's
this-
going
to
to
the
be
show?
this is three white Zoomers confronting generational trauma in post-war Japan on this premiere episode of Queens of the Monsters. This is Queens of the Monsters. We are here to talk about various Godzilla films. We're starting with the first one. The music that you are hearing right now is from Godzilla Kaiju Daikusen from the Super Famicom. And I am one of your hosts today. My name is Maya King. My pronouns are she and they. You can find me online at Maya King PA on twitter.com, and that's kind of the only relevant place to find me.
Hi, I'm Lucy, she, hers, and yeah, hi.
Can't find you anywhere on social media,
Because
Nowhere at
your
all.
Twitter's private.
which I mean is fine, but you have good takes.
People should encourage me, though, is the thing.
That's a fair point. Ariel?
Yes, that would be me. I am Ariel. My pronouns are she, her. And you can find me on Twitter at Pokemanic33. I don't use it very much though. And the site I do use is Blue Sky, but I probably shouldn't plug that.
I mean, you're free to.
Are you sure you want that associated with the show?
Oh, that's right. You do porno on there. Okay, never mind. So this is the first time any of us are ever doing our own podcast concept, so this is going to be a little bit dusty. We're going to figure it out as we go. We have a bit of a format, but we do need to fly by the seat of our pants just a little bit.
Early installment weirdness.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll figure it out, and then in like 2 years we'll go back and redo it, and it'll all be okay.
Which is fine, because if we switch to the once a month episode idea in the short term like I had, then we'll have a little while.
Yeah.
Gives us more time to figure out who killed Taemin Lee.
That's true. Some of us have distinct reasons that we are here today to speak on the monsters. I don't. I am just here as the kaiju enjoyer and person who took a film analysis course in sophomore year.
Well,
Yeah, I'm just here because I love, B-movie schlock stuff, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes you the same thing as me, but more American.
well,
Ariel's here for the suits.
You're also
I
from
mean-
America.
Yes, I'm here for the suits. I'm here for the little buildings getting blown up.
Yeah,
That's
that's kind of the best way to put it.
I'd call myself a tokusatsu enjoyer, but I don't actually know anything about tokusatsu. I like tokusatsu as a concept. We'll put it like that.
We'll probably get around to some of those at some point.
Oh,
Because
boy.
we will eventually run out of kaiju films after a while. We'll certainly run out of Godzilla films after a while.
I mean, are we gonna do Gamera at some point?
Do we have to? I guess we probably have to.
We have to, because we have to sing the MST3K song,
Well, we also have to sing the MS2TK song when we get to Megalon.
We believe in Gamera. It has made me insufferable since I was a small child.
Yeah, no, that's true. You're the one who wears the MST3K jacket into Micro Center and gets comments on it every time.
Well, it was a live show. I had to get the merch.
So that's us. We are here to talk about the kaiju films. As I said, we're here to start with the Godzilla films. Obviously, they are kind of the most iconic of the genre, and probably the most iconic export from Japan in general, I would say.
Cars.
Okay, cultural exports, not literal exports.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's kind of hard to say that there's a more iconic kaiju or toku franchise than Godzilla, seeing as it created both of those.
Yeah, okay, that's a little pedantry, but we get away with that sometimes, so it's fine.
I am nothing if not a pedant, so...
Yeah, you sure are. This is the very first film that we're discussing today, just called Godzilla, 1954, released in Japan, released in the US in a re-edited form that we will not be covering today.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, we will. November 3rd, 1954, by Toho Pictures. That's not particularly important, but it's a name that you've probably heard even if you aren't into kaiju films. So this film, as has been well trotted many times over, this is one of the serious Godzilla films, which is how the franchise started, even though there's actually not that many serious Godzilla films.
It gets real goofy real fast.
Oh yeah, real fast. But we start with a very serious, very emotional piece
It's kind of
Um,
like Rambo First Blood, but for Godzilla. It's like, it's the
Right.
aftermath of this war. We're dealing with all of the trauma, and then a few times later, we got to go and fight the Soviets and go rah and stuff.
it comes in and out of serious over the years ago, but this as the years go. But this was 1954, 9 years after we had dropped the nuclear bombs on Japan, the atomic bombs. Sorry, and it had sort of instilled this large generational trauma on the residents of Japan for reasons that I'm confident are obvious. So the obvious way to cope with that is to create a complex metaphor for it.
Vent art,
Yeah, vent art.
but for like an entire like cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, and this one's rather actually unique in this genre because of its recency to the atomic bombings, and also the fact that, of course, most if not all the people involved in the production on it would have lived through that, which
I mean,
gives them a bit of a personal
including
connection.
the director, which we
Yes,
may or may not get into at a future point.
yes,
He was literally military.
yeah. And I mean, we don't want to applaud the Imperial Japanese Army or any of their soldiers on here, to be clear. So let's not give that too much credence. But
We are not
yeah,
starting discourse. However, this podcast is officially anti-imperialist.
yes, hard to believe. Yes,
This is a pro Curtis LeMay podcast.
hold on.
We need the American people to understand that nuclear bombs are just bigger bombs.
With no deleterious side effects whatsoever.
Absolutely
They
not.
just blow up buildings of the bad people.
Welcome to the Thomas Power cast. Like 2 people are going to get that reference.
One of which is me. So, moving on to just the trauma. Very important thing here on this podcast, the trauma. True in general,
Fair
among
enough.
all
Yep.
3 of us. Continuing on to the full extent of the trauma that is shown to us in this 96-minute film, an hour and 36 minutes, which I learned while watching it. I thought it was an hour and 20 minutes, but that's the runtime of the American version. So this film is very fresh in my mind because I was watching it about an hour ago.
Yeah, I watched it last night, but
I watched it, finished it 2 hours ago. So,
Okay,
yeah.
that works. You
Okay.
finished it? You watched it in pieces?
Yeah.
You have this specific form of autism that I've never understood.
Well,
You will listen to podcasts over 5 days. And I don't get
okay,
it.
a podcast I
because
get.
my day is divided up by all different stuff, I gotta...
You go to work, you go home.
Yeah, and in between that, I listen to podcasts when I can manage. Or my Spotify day list, apparently, because that's a thing now. Oh, it's day list because of playlist. Huh. Okay.
So all of us have watched this film relatively recently.
This was actually my first viewing of this film. I have been aware of this movie for quite some time. I've been an aspiring film snob for 30 for half my life, but that hasn't come into practice. So I've been saving this movie for a special occasion for some time now. And what specialer an occasion than making a goddamn podcast?
Lucy saw this at the age of 5?
It must. I mean, when did Netflix send out DVDs? When did it start doing that? 'Cause,
Anytime from 1998 up until
Okay, well, I wasn't alive in 1998, so it must have. I was probably 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that. But yeah, it did leave a pretty distinct impression on me. Just this general frenetic gloom, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
is the vibe that it brings to the table a lot.
It is a very gloomy is a good word for it. There's this fog across the whole film of just general malaise and depression
And literal fog.
and literal fog. There's a lot of that too.
Which
Yeah.
is really the only way that you can possibly explain some of the ways that Godzilla sneaks around in this movie, because some of it's just inexcusable.
I don't know about sneaks around.
The first time he comes ashore and wrecks things, there is a bit where his foot just sort of comes into view in front of a train, and the train drivers react like there isn't an apartment building walking around 5 feet away from them.
Okay,
Before then?
fair
That's true.
enough.
Also, at the very beginning, we first see him from looking over the backside of a mountain, which
Which
would
is
be the gut behind there somewhere.
It's such a good bit. I love
It is.
that so
No,
much.
it's a really good frame, and we'll come back to it. But just to emphasize and I guess wrap up on the trauma discussion because it's important.
We have barely discussed that at all.
The trauma versus the metaphor. Those are two different concepts.
Yeah.
So this was a film made by people. These people have seen unspeakable horrors, and we will never quite understand it on the same level as they did, which is fine. It's a piece of art. It is emblematic of not only the time it was created, but the people who also created it. We will never fully be able to understand the motivations and some of the choices that went into it, even if most of the people involved in creating this were still alive, which they're mostly not. This was 1954. Fuck. Opinions on this vary wildly as a result. I think most people have a core understanding of what the metaphor means, which is that Godzilla is bad, and Godzilla is a metaphor for nuclear weaponry, and therefore nuclear weaponry is bad. I feel like that's most of the metaphor.
Well, if you're a communist, yes.
Can we stop doing discourse in the podcast?
That's not discourse. That isn't discourse.
No, that one was funny. We're leaving that one. The other ones are going. That one was funny. Yeah, so in a sense, basically, nuclear weapons are bad, and that's the crux of the film. I think we could all agree on that. Correct?
I think you could even extrapolate it to war in general. Maybe not necessarily as an explicit intent of the filmmakers, but in general, the metaphor still works the same way, I think.
That's true. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And how futile it is in comparison, but that could also still just be seen as an atomic bomb metaphor. Either way, it works.
The atomic bomb part is very explicit, given the fact that Godzilla is radioactive and was brought from his slumber by radioactive bombs, nuclear bombs, that's the word.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's explicit in the text. But I think you could extrapolate it a little bit further. So.
And the film also does make it clear that the military doesn't defeat Godzilla. Two guys in diving suits defeat Godzilla at the end of the day. Like a guy who's an independently wealthy mad scientist, and I think a guy who works for a shipping firm.
Yes.
Do I have this right?
Yeah, yes. Nope, that's correct. The next part of this, we wanted to talk about the metaphor first. I don't think there's much more to say on that. The whole thing is just nuclear weapons bad in a very explicit way. It's not subtle about it at all, and I mean that's fine.
That's part of why it's so striking, and effective.
Yeah. So there's not really much more we can cover on that. So the next component that we wanted to talk about is Ariel's component, which is the visuals. Yes, autism. The thing about making a film like this in the year 1954 is that you have to somehow portray a very large dinosaur monster, and you need to portray him destroying things specifically, which gets us into our next segment, which is the one where Ariel talks about the suits.
Well, it's not just the suits. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the special effects generally, and then I'm going to get autistic about the suits. So a lot of it you can kind of see, it's... I don't want to say it's dated, because I don't think it is. All the special effects look fantastic today, but the miniatures and the models are visible, and I don't mind that. It's what I'm autistic about. I like seeing the miniatures, but if you're looking for total immersion, you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit more than you would have to with the newer films,
which I think is kind of inherent, and you would be weird to think otherwise, because it's 70 years old.
But it does look pretty good for 70 years old.
Oh, yeah.
It looks fucking fantastic. There's a lot of miniatures, a lot of presumably thermite, or some other sort of explosive to make shit blow up, and a lot of matte paintings.
Yes, the matte paintings. Oh my god. The matte paintings on Oda Island specifically really just caught my eye in terms of just is that real? Is that if they painted that on? It blends so well.
The answer to that question is usually both, because they would take a photograph and then cut out part of it and then fill in the rest with matte paintings. And so for shots where you have rubble of buildings or giant footprints in the ground that are these really wide aerial shots, it'll be a real photograph of the area not Odo Island because Odo Island doesn't exist, but wherever they're shooting this, and they cut out the real building and they paint in a destroyed building on top of it, and it's seamless. You can't even fucking tell.
And you get that a lot more in the city segments, obviously.
Right.
And I mean, that's also impressive because, like, the fire effects are very good, by which I mean they're actual fire that they're compositing in somehow. It's quite notable whenever you're watching the scenes where Godzilla's destroying, and there's a wall of fire behind him, because it's actual fire, and you could tell because the distortion is visible. Yeah, you could see the distortion from the heat. So there's an actual fire, and he's standing in front of it, and then either with the models, or the miniatures rather, or the compositing. But there was a lot of work that went into this, and just every form of creativity and creative filmmaking you could probably think about, in terms of trying to make a scene work with as little technology as possible, because you do not have any, and most of it does not exist.
Yeah, so it's not even like you might see in like a newer film where they might intentionally limit themselves either for artistic purposes or for budget purposes, but that's not the case here. The technology literally did not exist yet.
Yeah.
The only miniature that like actually kind of took me out of it was there is one bit with a crashed helicopter after a hurricane, and the camera does focus on it in a way that made me think like, oh, that just looks like a Hess plastic toy, you know? But other than
I like that. I like the plastic toys.
The planes and the airborne vehicles are usually like that, actually.
Yeah.
Well, they have to make the model for one, and then they have to composite it over a skyline.
Yeah, then they have to make it fly, basically.
Yeah.
This is a larger problem with the jets that come on long later, but you know, with all of them, you have to physically make this small object fly through the air in a straight line. It's rather difficult.
Just ask Ed Wood if we're bringing trans people into this.
Sure, fine. Words don't have meaning anymore. Anything's a metaphor for anything. Anyway.
Glenn or Godzilla.
You can see a lot of these matte paintings in a bonus feature on the Criterion Blu-ray, which I watched in the research for this video. And it was a little strange as a video. It would have been better as like a GIF, or as like a like thing with a JavaScript thing with a slider in the middle.
Oh yeah, that you could move it back and forth and see the different frames, right?
Right, but it would be the original photograph, and then the next frame would be the photograph with all of the parts that they're going to replace cut out. And then the final frame is the completed shot with the matte painting inserted.
One note about that, on a technical level, that's actually a Laserdisc relic, because on a CAV disc, it would be at the end of the disc, and you could skip forward frame by frame.
That would be a much more ideal way to watch.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You got that a lot on early DVDs. That it's on a Criterion disc does not surprise me. I don't own the Blu-ray disc for this, or any home media. I watched it on my girlfriend's Plex server.
I will likely be giving you my copy because the rabbit ate it, and so I want to replace it.
I want the large Criterion set.
That's like $200 though.
Yeah, it is.
We'll
I'm
get
hoping
there.
one comes up on the used market. And
Subscribe to our Patreon.
We don't have a Patreon.
We don't have a Patreon.
We'll have a Patreon.
We'll come back to that. Yes.
Okay.
Are you done?
I'm done with the special effects. I'm now ready to move on to my 2 paragraphs about the suit.
Okay, go for it.
I may be running us a bit over with all
That's
this,
fine.
But I feel that it's important for this film in specific because it sets up a lot of the things that we'll see in the future films. So, like, in future episodes, we'll talk about the suits as they change, but we won't have to establish that this is exactly what they did, this is how they did it. We're kind of getting our information front-loaded here because it's the first one.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. There's a lot, because we're looking at this film with the context of a lot of other Godzilla films, which taints the experience of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you have to take yourself out of Godzilla as a franchise and as a mascot character, because this was just a movie.
Yeah.
Like, for another year, it was just this singular piece of work.
And they say a line at the end that is not sequel baiting. It's in fact furthering the metaphor. It just happens to look like sequel bait.
With regards to this suit, nowadays it's known as Shodai Goji. Shodai meaning first generation or something to the effect, and then Goji, which is of course the name of the monster.
Oh yeah, we probably should specify that because I use that word. Goji, Godzilla. Continue.
Goji is short for Gojira, which is Godzilla. But the suit was made initially as drawn concept art. I don't know if it was painted or, sketched or whatever, but they made drawn concept art, and then they made a series of clay statues to use as reference material before building the suit itself. And the suit was made of clay and rubber and a bunch of other shit. They took a giant block of raw rubber, softened it overnight, added clay, Vaseline, and gypsum, sewed it shut with cotton, and closed it with a hook and fishing line. I don't know if zippers didn't exist yet.
Zippers existed.
Were zippers expensive in 1954?
I don't know. I mean, this is war-ravaged Japan.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't put too much thought into it.
And then they painted it with oil spray paints. All of this is taken almost verbatim from Wikizilla, so thank you to the people who are better at researching and collating information than I am.
There's some very good concept art and photos of actually pretty much every version of every monster suit. So if you do want to see photos of this, because this is not a visual medium,
we don't have slides.
Yeah, we don't. Fully recommend you go check out the collections on Wikizilla.
There is so many photographs. Yeah, the original suit that they built weighed 150 kilos, and they put the actor in it, and he fell over and couldn't get up. So they went back to the drawing board, made him a new suit that was only 100 kilos, which is still, stupid heavy, but is more workable.
I had to Google the conversion on that. 220 pounds.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Jesus Christ.
The original 150 kilo suit, they cut him in half at the waist, and then used that for whenever they needed to do shots of his legs and feet stomping on stuff. Notably, there is a picture on Wikizilla of the actor in the suit wearing the legs, just kind of stomping through the town, the miniature set, and the file is titled rar I'ma stomp you.jpg.
When was it? When was that uploaded? I don't know if you saw.
Let me find it again.
I'd like to imagine that there's like a Men's Health magazine cover, but it's just how to get shredded so that you can lug around the Godzilla costume all day. It's it's a CrossFit routine.
Jesus.
Rar I'ma stomp you. Another copy of the same image was uploaded in 2016. Rar I'ma stomp you was uploaded in a more reasonable 2021.
There's also some post-production photos of the suit on Wikizilla, which includes the very amusing photo of Godzilla wearing a lei.
And a luau, yes, holding a ukulele. I was just gonna say that the eyes were wooden, and that they were connected along with the mouth, down through the body, out through the tail, to be controlled externally for mouth movements and such, by way of motorcycle brake lines.
Yeah, okay, I could see that.
Which is just the coolest shit to me. It sounds kind of silly, but it's really ingenious, as opposed to having, I don't know, the suit actor have his hand up there and manipulate it like a puppet or something. Beyond these two suits, the leg suit and the main suit, Wikizilla makes mention of an unfinished third suit, which would apparently eventually be repurposed for the underwater shots, likely at the end of the film. That's one point that Wikizilla doesn't have a whole lot on, but they have a picture of it, at least. And then the final Godzilla used for the film was a Head and Shoulders puppet that was used for any shots where they needed like a close up of his head or like him doing elaborate arm movements that the suit wouldn't allow. You can always tell when it's on screen because it looks very not even a little bit like the rest of the main suit. Wikizilla describes it as puffy, which I think is a good word. He looks a little bit like he ate a bee. And notably, this is the first time that we see Godzilla is Puppet Godzilla.
That makes sense. Okay, that makes more sense.
It did look weird from the face, like facing forward. Yeah.
And the puppet, the front-facing Godzilla.
It's like Godzilla had his wisdom teeth taken out.
He looks a little bit silly, but he can also be very intimidating, like in his own right. A little dorky, but also like really freaky when he needs to be.
There is one more Godzilla, which is the one that's just a skeleton.
Right.
Like that's technically Godzilla.
I do have a note for that as well. It was
thought it was being funny.
Wire with rubber built around it. And I'm sure we'll get into this when we do the plot summary, but it freaks me out. I do not like skeleton Godzilla. He's freaky. There's a photo of him like of the skeleton just like suspended in air, and it's like a much better shot than you actually see in the film.
Yeah, you only see it very briefly.
It is very unsettling. But this suit, the Shodai Goji, in comparison to the later Gojis, of which there are several, before we get to the point where he's just CG every time. He's a lot frumpier than many of the later Godzillas. He has a lot of folds and wrinkles, especially in like the stomach. He looks a little more like cloth. I don't know if that's because of the way the rubber was cast or if it's because of the fact that he literally is cloth under it. But he's a little wrinkly, and I don't know quite how to describe it.
I don't have a way to describe this, but I know it's true because it comes up whenever you see people discuss different Godzillas. They will usually cite the GMK Godzilla, which we'll come to eventually, as looking similarly frumpy, but then somebody will point out, well, that's just like 54 Godzilla. And yeah, I mean, I could see what they mean by that. They have a primordial pouch in a sense.
Yes, yes.
Don't we all?
I don't think that's true. I don't think we all do. But his legs are very short and stumpy, and his tail is also rather short relative to later suits. He looks a little more narrow to me. I don't know if that's anything that's like verifiable, but he looks like you kind of took him and you kind of squished him vertically a little bit. He looks very narrow.
A lot of it comes down to how the eyes are, because they're much smaller than most of the later Godzillas.
They're also a lot further back on the head.
A lot more dinosaur-y.
I would describe the head as very dinosaur-like. He has a long, narrow snout and eyes that are very far back on his head. A very aggressive, sculpted brow line, which is something that'll come and go throughout various suits. And he has ears. He got little teeny tiny ears that will...
Oh, yeah, he does.
Just kind of go away.
I didn't realize that he does have little tiny ears. Huh. Can he hear with them?
I mean, I would assume
no
that all Godzillas could probably hear.
I guess there's no reason for me to assume one way or another on that. It's not relevant, but...
Can you talk to Godzilla in his tiny little ears?
Will he understand you? Considering that I don't understand this film because I don't speak Japanese despite 3 years of college academic Japanese training. Is his experience in this situation like surprisingly similar to mine?
Because he doesn't understand the language.
Yeah. What language does he speak? Oh, actually,
Skryonk.
Yeah.
He knows one thing, and it is Skryonk.
Yes.
But the last thing that I'd like to talk about with regards to the suit before we start actually talking about the movie is the color.
Lack thereof.
That's a hotly contested topic within this suit because, of course, the film was shot in black and white, and there are no color production materials, so the only pictures that we have of him are black and white. And, of course, the suit, being made of rubber and clay and Vaseline, is long gone, so we don't actually know what color it was. There have been some accounts from people who worked on the film. One of the people who designed the suit, Aizo Kamai, said that it was painted gray, but a cinematographer named Sadamasa Arikawa said that it was red black.
We don't speak Japanese. I'm sorry.
This is true. I am particular. I'm very white.
We are anti-Japanesist.
Hold on. Keep going.
Some people speculate that it was like a brownish gray color, which is personally the way I like to see it, if for no other reason than I'm tired of Godzilla being gray and green. Most of the merchandise you'll see, like toys and figures and resin kits and whatever else, are gray because the movie's gray, so they make it gray to replicate the look of the movie. Notably, this design would come back in Tokyo SOS, where they would remake the suit from scratch for a flashback shot, and it was also shot in black and white. They painted him in color, but it was shot in black and white, so he didn't have any color.
They did this a couple times. They needed flashback shots of this specific monster because it's a distinct monster. So
the canon will get very strange, and we will see that as time goes on.
Yeah.
But in the universe, in the timeline in which the like 90s films, we'll say, for the sake of simplicity, take place, the Godzilla in those movies is a separate Godzilla from this Godzilla.
Yeah. What did they... Yeah, okay, they only physically remade the model for... Actually, against Mechagodzilla, not as Tokyo SOS, but they're a year apart.
Right.
They're a year apart, doesn't matter. They did... A couple other companies have rebuilt it because one company in particular, up.art, according to what I'm reading right now, 3D scanned a different suit that somebody else had, like a garage
resin
suit.
kit, like it's like a model kit.
Yeah, so like a slightly larger model kit, but not actually large enough to be a suit.
So they scanned it, scaled it up.
Yeah, and that was a lot of effort that they put into
an art exhibit? ?
And couple Boss Coffee commercials.
Because Japan.
Godzilla do be drinking coffee.
Boss Coffee also has its own article on the Wikizilla.
They made several different commercials.
Yes.
Within this franchise.
Now, is there ever one where Tommy Lee Jones and Godzilla team up? Because if so, I need to see it, and I need to have seen it yesterday.
I mean, Boss Coffee also shows up in the films sometimes. Going back to GMK because I have a certain level of autism for these films, but if you
GMK in particular,
yes,
for you,
yeah, you can see Boss Coffee vending machines in the background, which that's why I'm not surprised that it has a Wikizilla article. But it is very funny, particularly because it's not actually mentioned anywhere on there. It's just the commercials.
And then Godzilla pulls out a Cerveza Cristal.
That's going to date this immediately.
Good.
That's all I have on the special effects and the suit, so we can start actually talking about the movie now. I'm sorry.
So, to get into the actual film, now that we're 45 minutes in, basically, that's okay. This is actually perfectly fine for a 90-minute podcast like we wanted to do. So, the film opens with a title card that says made with support of the Japan Coast Guard, which is cool.
We do that in America, too.
We do it in America a lot, but in Japan, it has to be a little bit different because it's like it's like the Coast Guard, so it's pro-social instead of just being super militaristic and stuff. But I really can't... It has the same vibes as the original Michael Bay Transformers movie, where it's just like constantly like, oh, these weird creatures are emerging and stuff like that. But then also the military is just there doing military stuff, and it's like real military dudes.
Funny, that's not the Michael Bay movie I thought of when I think of U.S. military involvement in Hollywood.
Pearl Harbor? Wait, did Michael Bay did Pearl Harbor?
Michael Bay did Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
That one sucked because it was just like the attack showed like just like a bunch of modern warships and stuff like that. It's like none of these were at Pearl Harbor. What are we doing?
Oh no,
here?
We've breached Lucy's autism now.
Quick, back on topic.
My Pacific War autism cannot be... Well, my Pacific War autism is pretty well suited to this one, if we're being perfectly honest with ourselves here.
And then we open with sort of the iconic Godzilla music, which...
And many roars.
Yes.
Just over the opening credits. It's
Yeah.
just a bunch of roars, one after the other.
Many roars.
And then it goes into the music while the opening credits continue.
Yes. And this is a Japanese film from the 60s, 50s, rather. Well, 50s through the 70s. So you get the credits at the beginning. But then we transition pretty quickly into into the shot of a random shipping boat for freighter.
The felicitous wyvern, you might say.
I will say right off the bat, something that will apply to a lot of this film is that the lighting is very stark. This is a very dark movie. This there are several shots in this film where I genuinely can't tell whether they're supposed to be day shots or night shots or day for night shots because it's just all so dark.
Yeah, no, this is pretty accurate.
To be fair, I don't know how much of that is present in the original negatives, which are now lost. This is like the Criterion Blu-ray is struck from like a second generation master.
Wow, it's like Casablanca, which is great because they're both in the greatest films of all time lists.
It's like most films of this era, to be fair.
Yeah, fair.
It's also like Citizen Kane.
So pretty much immediately we see this freighter and all of the sailors on it immediately sort of attacked and disabled by an unknown object. It just comes across as like a big flash of light. We don't actually see anything.
We do see a splash of water hit the radio guy who is tapping out SOS repeatedly, and the water, I don't know why, but it just instantly kills him.
This was one of the 5 notes I had.
He doesn't drown or anything like that. It's just that he gets a little bit splashed and he instantly slumps over.
Like, the implication has to be electrocution, right? But we don't see anything to visually convey that. So he just falls over because it got a little wet, which is bad. If you have that affliction, that's fine, but you probably shouldn't become a sailor.
If you're going to die in the water, don't do that.
So, of course, this boat sinks. Most of the people die. Shit. Suddenly I forget if it's this one or the next one where you have 3 survivors.
The next one is when they have the 3 survivors.
Okay. So nobody survives from this. So, of course, now that a mysterious force has sunk a boat in the Pacific, they decide to do the only sensible thing and send out another boat.
That's where I wrote in my notes. So I said it sounds like he's just feeding cargo boats to Godzilla, and then his adjutant started crying.
Hi, this is Maya in post-production. Due to a technical glitch in Zencastr, which is the greatest application ever made, we lost probably about 30 seconds of audio here, but that's actually perfectly fine because in it was a glaring factual error where we referred to the random guy at the beginning who works for the shipping line as our main protagonist, because there are 2 employees of the shipping line that get named. One of them is this guy, and the other one is actually our protagonist. We then refer to him as being on the, quote, Sigma grind set, which is where we will pick up. While we're here, I would just like to say, if you haven't, go ahead and go follow us on twitter.com, where you can reach us at QOTMpod. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Wants to go on a date, but he can't because he's on the Sigma grind set, and he has to go to work because of the boat on his company or the company at which he works at the very least, that just got sank by a mysterious destructive force in the middle of the ocean. And so and his girlfriend is, I don't remember any of the names, I'm too face blind, but these are main characters effectively. She's disappointed, but she's like, work's work. Right, Emiko. And yes. Yamane is Emiko's father, and he's a biologist.
Yamane is the family name.
It's always the scientist. They're always the daughter. The beautiful daughter of the scientist is always like dating the strapping generic man, and they're going to kill the monster together.
She doesn't... I guess I can't say that. I was going to say she doesn't do a whole lot, but she's kind of like a driving force in the narrative later on.
Yeah, at first she doesn't do much, because at first we're just looking at Grindset McGee.
We are establishing a trope from the very beginning of human drama playing a running parallel to the Godzilla destroying shit conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And future films will play with the balance back and forth, usually with too much human interaction, but
Mhm.
Well, giant rubber suits are expensive, so you've got to like also have the Playhouse Actors Workshop thing going on at the
Yeah,
same
you
time.
you ultimately have to balance the fact that people want to see the monster drama with the fact that the monster drama is expensive, and very quickly we see the budgets for these films slashed, and it becomes a serious problem to actually do any monster drama to the point that we just get reused footage left and right. Which none of this is a problem here because this is a high budget mainline picture, and it's one of the very few that we will see in the course of this podcast.
and we will see footage from this film in at least one more film.
Yes,
This franchise is a disaster.
yes, this podcast is a disaster.
The word suit has lost all meaning to me.
What good podcast isn't a disaster?
Uh, so
Anyway,
so the same mysterious force takes a second boat. I don't not the same one, is it? No,
No.
no. The
They
same
take
one.
like it takes like a third boat too. It takes a fishing boat out as well.
Yeah, is sent out on a second boat. Like we said, this boat does the same thing, meets the same fate. It gets destroyed by the mysterious force that they had already lost one boat in and chose to send a second boat into. But this time there are 3 survivors who proceeds to row to the remote Pacific island of Odo Island.
Odo Island does not exist.
Yes, a fictional Pacific island that we will see numerous times throughout the Godzilla films, and of course there are survivors, like I said, and another boat goes to rescue them. We have now sent a third boat directly into the mystery hell portal, and it meets the same fate. Yeah, so this one has the one survivor. We have a grand total of 4. At this point, I believe. I might be wrong about that.
Something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
At this point, the news is out to the press, but the government hasn't said anything about it. They haven't explained it because, this is another trope that the franchise will hang onto very tightly, is that the government wants to keep things under wraps to not cause a panic.
Then we get over to Odo Island, where we learn from some natives about that this monster is named Godzilla, essentially.
That this monster is named Godzilla?
Yes. This is where we meet another very common Godzilla trope, which is the wise old man.
Every single time.
Yes.
We also get probably, I think, my favorite thing in this entire movie, which is the Godzilla folk dance, because I'm trying to imagine like the guy who was specifically tasked with designing the dance and the costumes and everything like that.
Which we also get in a good number of other Godzilla films.
It's such a fun piece of world building. Just like,
Right.
yeah, this is where the Godzilla dancers do their thing.
And it was something I was kind of struck by watching the film, as someone who's kind of an outsider to, historical Asian culture outside of the general sphere of being a weeaboo, is that life in rural Japan, and by extension the Pacific Islands, in the 1950s was like very traditional and like I don't want to say primitive, but certainly
Well, these
not
movies
modern.
these movies want to say primitive. They clearly do.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
yes.
There's like some National Geographic nudity going on at one point.
This is true. Our wise old man, who was in every single Godzilla film, not the same guy, just different guys doing the same role.
Even in TriStar Godzilla,
Yes.
as a wise old guy.
Yes, it's like the one trope that they imported over. But anyways, this one's unique because he is immediately super misogynist. I don't remember the specifics, but there was just the 3 women that he randomly called cows
Right.
and stupid.
Because they didn't believe in Godzilla anymore.
Yeah.
Because he explains to the survivors that Godzilla was a monster that used to attack them regularly. And so they started sacrificing children to Godzilla to keep him at bay.
Mm-hmm.
But then eventually they phased that out in favor of doing the folk dance that Lucy mentioned, which is where they stand today.
Because
And
of woke, you can't
Because of
sacrifice
woke, you
children
can't
anymore.
sacrifice children to Godzilla.
Yes.
And one of the local women says, like, oh, do you really still believe in Godzilla? He doesn't exist anymore. And then the dude's like, shut the fuck up. Godzilla still exists. And if you keep saying that, I'll feed you cows to him.
We're in like minute 20 of the film, if I remember right. It gets real weird. And then it gets kind of normal after we do a little bit of the Noble Savage stuff. We watch as a lot of the village gets smashed by a large storm, which is
Obviously related to Godzilla, but
yeah,
it takes the form of a typhoon.
yeah, and until it doesn't, because then we see Godzilla crunch a house,
Well, yes.
and that's that's the first glimpse we get of him, just his foot. But yes,
And I believe it's also the first, at least the first notable model photography in the film is this typhoon scene, particularly the helicopter.
yes, yeah, because then some reporters come in, and that's sort of that not particularly relevant to the story there. It all just sort of comes back down to whether or not you believe it's Godzilla or not. And some of the outsiders do, some of the outsiders don't, some of the natives do, some of the younger natives don't. And we go back to the comment from earlier.
And then Godzilla actually shows up and clarifies the situation once and for all.
Yes. The people that survived this were on like a weird cycle of people that survived one attack and then witnessed a second attack and might not have survived. Which actually does bring us back to the nuclear metaphor, probably not intentionally, but this did happen to some people.
One guy. It happened.
Yeah,
It
I was
happened
going to say, I know it happened to one guy.
It happened to one hilariously unlucky guy in the shipping industry.
Yes,
who was on a business trip and was explaining to his boss what had happened to him on this business trip when the second bomb hit.
Yeah, so I don't think that was an intentional metaphor, but kind of is. Everybody
there are intentional, like, very direct historical parallels.
One
even
woman,
if that's not one of them.
One woman on the train in a later scene does say like she was literally in Nagasaki.
Everybody that survives this is brought to the National Diet Building, which becomes a landmark for the Godzilla franchise right away. I don't want to say they testify, but
that's the term the film uses.
Okay, I missed that part. So of course, after they learn their side of the story, we then decide we're going to send more bodies into this wasteland and put more people at risk. So they send an investigative party, which is a pretty large party, if I remember right.
Notably, during the testimony, we are introduced to another main character who we will then see a lot of in the following scenes.
Yes.
Of the Dr. Yamane.
Yes,
a biologist.
Paleontologist. Both.
Can't
remember.
Zoologist.
Sure.
He is all the things that I wanted to be when I was 8.
Correct. And he testifies and says explicitly that he thinks it's a dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like a dinosaur. And in my notes I have here that his tie was outside of his suit jacket, and while he was testifying he kind of picks it up and tucks it back in.
Yes.
And I don't know if that was an
Everybody
improv,
I've watched the film with has commented on this.
or if it was a character moment. I don't know, but I noticed it.
He's got a real absent-minded professor thing going on here yeah.
So they send this party off along with Dr. Yamane's daughter and her boyfriend, protagonist, semi-protagonist, main character. As the ship is being seen off by a large crowd at the pier, we are also introduced to our actual main protagonist, Dr. Daisuke Serizawa.
He's mysterious at this point. We won't actually see him properly for some time, but we see a mysterious guy
with an eye patch.
We presume he has an eye patch because he has like the string going across his face, but he's wearing big shades.
Is his eye patch ever explained? I don't.
Yes, it is, but I don't remember it. It was like a one-off line that I don't remember.
Was he a bomb survivor? Did Godzilla take it in a fight? What was it?
And he's notably very stoic. He's not cheering on as everyone else in the crowd is. He's just kind of watching.
Okay, he'd lost his eye in the war. That's apparently all we learn.
All right, fair enough.
But it does help to demarcate him as pay attention to this guy. He sees them off. They talk about him a little bit on the way there, and then arrive on Odo Island.
And we see a lot of like, I don't know where this is exactly placed in the film, but I have it around here in my notes. We have a lot of very like forlorn shots of locals standing amongst the rubble.
Mm-hmm.
and it's what I would consider to be the first like very, very explicit anti-nuclear message of the film,
Yeah.
because we have a bunch of like locals that are just lost. Like their entire village is just destroyed, and they're just kind of like coming to grips with the fact that everything that they know is gone.
Yeah. They find a large footprint, which, obviously it's Godzilla's. They Geiger counter it. The whole area is extremely radioactive, which, I mean, yeah, that is a rather explicit reference to our metaphor.
My next note with regards to the footprint is Wogue friend in footprint,
Yes,
because they find a trilobite in the
Yes.
footprint.
We are then sort of jarred out of the situation by somebody ringing the village alarm bell. Big stone bell, hits it with a big hammer. And everybody, sort of starts running as we are very quickly shown popping his head up from behind a mountain is Godzilla.
For the first time ever.
As I said before when we were talking about the suit, this is not the main suit. This is a puppet that's just from that's just like a bust plus arms.
Which is why it looks much different than the rest of the times we see him in the film.
Right. And I don't know if this is like actually a thing or not, but I seem to have memory of people making like a shitpost out of this shot of Godzilla because it looks a little silly.
Yeah, no, they have. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It does look a little bit silly.
It does, and it doesn't take away from the fact that it's a powerful scene.
It's like even in spite of the puppet being a little wonky, it's still like really effective, and he's very menacing standing over the mountain.
These people are scared, reasonably so.
Except so scared that two of them just sort of sit there.
I did not notice this.
I mean,
like literally instead of like fleeing, what's his face and Yamane like huddle down.
They're there to investigate it though, so it makes sense.
And we will see throughout the rest of the film that Yamane has a specific interest in Godzilla in a way that no one else in the film does.
Mm-hmm. So we then, after seeing a little bit of mass panic, we go back to the National Diet Building, where Yamane is presenting all the things that he found on the island.
Sorry, I need to go back again because most of my notes are relatively unremarkable, but occasionally I'll have just the dumbest shit in here.
Oh, I actually also have something I forgot, so this is good.
Because after Godzilla like terrorizes the village a little bit and everyone runs away, he goes back into the ocean. And my notes read, Godzilla slinging massive hog on beach.
Sometimes I do regret having ears.
I have no idea what you're referring to.
If I could just Helen Keller my way through things, sometimes.
There's a matte painting of footprints in the sand with the mark from the tail in the middle.
And where you saw only two footprints and a massive Godzilla dick, that's where I carried you.
Yeah, the only note that I have says none of these people have any semblance of protection against radiation.
Yeah, they don't even try. The danger is elucidated, but they don't even try.
Yeah, no, and it's explicitly mentioned a few times to stop standing around here. And then, and they keep doing it. Everybody's hanging around. There's a large crowd around this very irradiated hole. It's not fun. Anyways, now that we've talked about cock.
Yeah,
it was inevitable. We go back to the Diet Building where he presents the things that he found here. The trilobite is of central interest because he has some sort of autism.
The 2 million year old trilobite, I should add, which I just said in my notes that, what is this, the Creation Museum? Because I'm pretty sure our understanding of geology and timescales and stuff like that was not that bad back in the 1950s compared to all things considered. So Was this just like a general understanding that there were trilobites 2 million years ago?
Fair enough. I didn't think of it because I didn't know, but yeah, you would be correct. That is not the correct timescale.
Yeah,
It might just be jargon. Like
it doesn't really
it's a
matter.
prehistoric creature, so they say it's old.
Well, it nagged at me, so.
And then they pass around the fossil like a school presentation. They just hand it to one guy. It's in like a glass case or something. But they hand it to the one guy.
Yeah.
He looks at it. He's like, "Oh, this is cool," and then passes it on to the next guy.
We then get a different lesson on dinosaurs. We get a pretty decently long history lesson on dinosaurs.
My eyes kind of
a
glossed
little
over.
jarring, but I get
didn't
it.
really listen to this.
I get what they're doing, but I don't know if it's necessary. After this, we come to the conclusion that Godzilla is evolved from these people, dinosaurs. And then we move on to the fact that they had found a specific radioactive isotope in the sediment from the Godzilla footprint, strontium-90,
19?
which I don't actually know the relevance of. 90,
I thought it was
90.
maybe it is. I don't remember that much.
Doesn't matter. I don't know the relevance of it.
Or if it
it's
even,
scientifically
like,
accurate,
exists.
I'm not sure. Anyway, this would only happen if after an atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb. So the conclusion is that, of course, Godzilla was irradiated and pissed off thanks to atmospheric hydrogen bomb testing on the South Pacific, which was a thing at this point in time.
God damn it, Edward Teller.
Yeah, that was our history lesson. That was our lesson on the background here, and it kind of explains everything that we needed to know for this. Radiation, bad, as previously stated. Radioactive weapons, bad. Nuclear weapons, bad. Somebody then suggests that they hide this information.
And then a member of the public suggests that this is a matter of public interest, obviously, and that they need to reveal it. And then a riot breaks out, and the press immediately starts just taking all the photographs in the world. Like they're mostly just taking notes for the presentation, but the moment a fight starts, they start taking pictures.
And I mean, the woman that starts this fight is pretty accurate. I mean, there is a whole public safety thing going on here. This is a recurring theme across Godzilla films.
Every single time.
Yes. The government bad at this. True. And the public has to protest that essentially. We only get a few minutes of it this time. It's not necessarily important, I don't think. They pretty much immediately released all the information on Godzilla, which, very reasonable reaction to having a large riot at the Diet building. It would be like if we tried to not report on the January 6th.
Right.
Which we would not have been able to do that.
Though people didn't have smartphones in 1954.
This is true. The JMSDF, the Marines, go out and
I must interject. That is definitely not the Marines. That is just the Japanese Navy.
I don't know how to respond to that. One of the Japanese armed self-defense force branches that happens to deal with the water is sent out to use depth charges to try and kill Godzilla, which does not work, naturally.
But it makes cool explosions on the surface of the water.
It does, and it also makes Dr. Yamane very mad.
He's so mad that he has to go ponder
he has to
his
go
Stegosaurus.
Meditate about it.
Yes.
In my favorite shot of this entire fucking movie, where he's just in his study staring at a model of a Stegosaurus skeleton and just glowering at it.
Because he's a zoologist.
He wants to be able to study Godzilla.
Rather than kill him.
Which is an interesting perspective to take when it's, leveling villages. But
elephants do that shit all the time, so.
We could put him in a zoo. No, we can't do that. That's then we become Jurassic Park,
or King Kong.
Then we become Godzilla 98.
True, or King Kong.
Yes.
Who will become relevant sooner than you may think.
2 films from now,
Jesus.
Not counting this one. After this happens, we see Godzilla again. He comes up in Tokyo Bay, which is the first sign that we are in serious shit. This time we're actually not in serious shit. He just kind of causes a lot of panic and then goes back without actually causing damage.
I think that's kind of on you, though, if you go out on a yacht party in the midst of all of this. Like, you kind of do deserve a Godzilla encounter.
Yeah.
And amongst the crews We also have some really nice looking shots of the city streets with all the neon lights. I guess they probably wouldn't be neon, they'd just be light bulbs, but the point is they look cool.
After this happens, we get back into human drama for a second. Dr. Yamane's daughter, Emiko. She's in an arranged marriage with Dr. Serizawa, which is sort of the first time that he becomes relevant. But she's actually into his colleague, Ogata, from earlier as well. Wants to marry him as a result. So after a little bit of fluff, she goes to talk to him.
In his meth lab.
In his cartoon meth lab with beakers and curly Q tubes.
Yes.
Where does I have to imagine that Serizawa was like independently wealthy nobility or something like that, because that's the only reason I can imagine him having all these digs.
I don't think it's specified. It's not really important.
He's got like the ultimate marine biology setup, but it's in like this like stone castle of a house almost, I think. And
Yeah.
And it's in like a secret lair, like a secret laboratory.
Just massive chairman vibes off of this guy. Like, Japan really loves the trope of the sort of the outcast, eccentric, wealthy man who just pursues his own.
It's Chairman
sort of...
Kaga, by the way, from Iron Chef.
Yeah, we didn't establish.
We did not describe that before we dropped the reference.
I've consumed like 10 cultural products from Japan in my entire life, so let's just...
We are also autistic about Iron Chef. Just let that be known.
Yes. Hopefully it shouldn't come up more than once. Anyways. There's a brief subplot about it, about her using a reporter interviewing him about a new invention, and her using that as sort of a ploy to tell him that she doesn't want to marry him. Not important. He turns away the reporter, but takes her in there and shows her his new invention, which is we don't see anything about. Yeah, we don't see anything about it.
We have it makes a very strong impression though, because
yes.
He demonstrates it. And we see Emiko just utterly terrified, screaming bloody murder, and like just rushing out of the room like it's the most disturbing thing she's ever seen.
And that's all we see for now.
And she promises not to tell a soul about it, which he requested beforehand as well, I believe.
So we don't learn strictly what this is. That's very important. We'll figure it out later. She leaves, pretty scared by this, and scarred by this. Does not tell him about the whole marriage thing. Oh well.
You've just been traumatized. Like whatever you were planning on doing before, it's just gone.
So we then go back to Godzilla comes back, and this is not the major Godzilla attack, but it's the first big one. Because he comes ashore from Tokyo Bay and starts destroying Tokyo, Shinagawa specifically. It's a pretty short sequence that shows us a lot of destruction in very short order, and it shows just how destructive of a force Godzilla is here.
And it shows us in part how hard the suit was to work with, but also in universe terms that Godzilla's this massive lumbering beast
who can sneak into train yards still, apparently. I'm not over this. I'm not over the fact that Godzilla is apparently an ambush predator.
We also have the iconic moment, not the iconic shot, because the actual shot itself doesn't really appear in the film, but we have an iconic moment of him chomping on train cars. There's a piece of concept art that's been shared around a lot as like a piece of promotional material that's not actually from the film, but demonstrates a similar scene. And it's sort of an iconic moment that's been replicated several times over.
What is important is that Godzilla is not supposed to be shown eating humans. That has been an explicit hardline rule Toho has had since this film. So, you get him eating objects like the train instead.
Implying that people are being eaten.
Yes.
They do say that Godzilla ate people.
Yeah, but they don't.
That's like the I'm forgetting the word, but those are the oral traditions that are handed down by the natives of Oto Island that say that people were eaten. So it's in the air whether or not he actually eats people.
Yeah. So after this, the Japanese military, the JSDF, in consultation with militaries from other countries who have all flown in, we get a nice sequence of aircraft 3 Lockheed Constellations and 1 Boeing 377 from Pan Am, actually.
From Pan Am. I do have a note on that.
Yeah, I do too.
There's Japan Airlines planes and then 1 Pan Am.
Anyway, I just had plain autism, so that was in my notes for that reason. They decide to build a line of electric fences.
In about 5 minutes.
Yeah, electric towers serving as an electric fence mainly. Something that they could run large amounts of electricity through with the intent of using it to electrocute Godzilla. Should he come back around? They evacuate civilians and put up a large blockade along this line of electrical towers. I believe the number they give is 50,000 volts to kill him.
I do not remember.
I had a comparison to use with the elephant, and now I don't remember what it was. How much voltage they put through the elephant to kill them.
Fuck you, Thomas Edison.
I also don't remember the name of the elephant. I just remember.
Was it Jumbo? Was it Trumbo? Was it something like that? Some
Trumbo?
Trumbo the elephant.
Dalton Trumbo the elephant.
I'd like to see Donald Trumbo the elephant wiggle his way out of this one. Large electrical currents. Anyway, it's not to spoil anything, but Godzilla comes back the next evening and faces the large electrical tower set up. And then, of course, everybody asks, I'd like to see Godzilla wriggle his way out of this jam, where he then wriggles out of this jam.
Wriggles his way out of this jam.
Well, nevertheless.
In the immortal words of Blue Oyster Cult, he pulls the spinning high-tension wires down.
True.
We have a matte painting of a large, long row of pylons extending into the horizon, and it looks very good.
And again, I have to ask, how much time has elapsed that they can set all this stuff up? Because it's covering the entire coast of at least the greater Tokyo region, right?
Tokyo Bay.
Okay, fair enough. But that's still a lot of infrastructure and not a lot of time.
Fair.
And I love me some military infrastructure and stuff like that. It just feels very fast.
Yeah. The JSTF bombardment also does nothing, as you would expect. He breaks through these electrical wires, and it's a big spark show, and it's really visually impressive. After that, we get the atomic breath for the very first time.
It's not called the atomic breath yet. It's actually never acknowledged in the film, but we would go on to know it as the atomic breath. But It looks very different here than it would in the future.
It's kind of like it's kind of like the Frost villain from one of those Christmas puppet specials.
It does have a very Frost look to it.
It looks like misty, is how I would describe it.
As far as I'm aware, they had to paint this onto the cells.
Paint on top of the negative.
Yeah,
presumably.
on the negative, not the cells, but you know what I mean. So every frame of this was hand painted, which is horrifying.
Of course, we would go on to know the atomic breath as basically a laser beam, but I like this atomic breath for the implications that it has, because if it's like a mist, it's like a destructive mist that destroys whatever he hits directly, but then the particulates or whatever settle down and irradiate everything they touch. I kind of like the storytelling implications of that, so I kind of wish they'd come back to this style of atomic breath in the future. It's more like breath, really.
At this point, we get the very large kaiju destruction scene. This is the big one. This is the one that is most of the effort went into it. It's also the most emotional one, because we see a lot of human death, rather.
There's one particular line that hits insanely hard. It's probably one of the most emotionally resonant parts in the film. I would almost go as far as to describe it as almost try hard, I guess. I mean, it hits hard, but it feels like they were really reaching for it.
It was intentional, yeah.
Yeah, where a woman is huddled with her young child, like a toddler-aged child, in an alley between two buildings, and she says, "We'll join Daddy soon. We'll be where Daddy is," and then presumably they get eviscerated by Godzilla.
Yeah, we don't actually see what happens to them.
So it kind of conveys the scale of the destruction, that we don't see every single individual person, but we see that there's people whose lives are being impacted very directly.
It's scary. I mean, you feel that these people are going through a lot of pain in a very serious way. A lot of these people would have been traumatized in the same way by the atomic bombs. Tokyo wasn't nuked. I know this, but still, some of them would have experienced this. And
I imagine living anywhere in Japan would probably
give you some sort of trauma.
Right.
Yeah, it's emotionally powerful. And we also get the iconic scene with the news broadcasters who are standing on top of well, standing in a sort of catwalk of a transmitter.
And they are the Sigmaist of the Sigmas.
They are fully on that Edward R. Murrow grind. They just to report this shit.
The reporter, well, they're broadcasting over the shortwave. They're like not doing this officially, presumably because the infrastructure probably doesn't exist anymore. Like they're broadcasting, I guess, off the tower that they're literally standing on, and the reporter is watching Godzilla in the distance and describing it in immense detail, and then Godzilla starts coming their direction, and he's like,
then he's not describing him in the distance anymore.
he's like, Godzilla's coming close. I think this is the end. Are we going to survive? This is the end. Goodbye. And then Godzilla just destroys the tower, and they all fucking die.
Yeah, he chews on it rather gently. Actually, we get a few seconds of him just chewing on the electrical tower and the transmission tower. Sorry, before it falls over, and it takes this broadcasting team with them. It is powerful here because these guys were doing their job and trying to help convey the sense of danger until they literally couldn't anymore because they were killed by the sense of danger.
I don't know if I go that far. I get what you're saying, but the way they're talking is very
sensational.
Right. That's the word.
I figured where you were going to go with that, yeah. Both of those are reasonable. This goes on for probably 25, 30 minutes of the film. It's by far the longest sequence. This film is pretty high up there on Godzilla screen time, as was mentioned earlier.
Surprisingly, there are many films where this is not the case.
Yes. And, it's meant to be the climax, the action climax.
And it is spectacular.
It is. Every last shot, there are large cityscapes with large, paintings of fire in the background that are just beautifully done, beautifully composited. And, it looks real. It's pretty striking visually.
And adding to it is that, and this is the case for a lot of the Godzilla destruction shots all across the film, but it's obviously the most prevalent here. There's a lot of very quick cuts and very short shots of Godzilla just destroying like one thing, and then it cuts to something else, and it really does a good job of conveying the scale of the damage that's going on. Part of that was also probably due on a technical level to the fact that the suit sucked in a sort of like Jaws would be famous for doing however many years later. It's kind of that situation where the suit sucked, so they kind of had to do what they could. And the end result was a much more visually striking film.
And so then after this, the JSDF is pretty much out of options and is defeated pretty easily. They keep throwing more stuff at Godzilla. None of it works. Tanks and whatnot.
Planes.
Yeah, this goes on for the entire night. Eventually, they do send some planes, some jets.
The planes fire missiles that look a little bit like firecrackers. Because they probably are firecrackers.
Yes. This doesn't have any material effect on him, but it does lure him back out into Tokyo Bay and away from Tokyo, which, is naturally important because in order to figure out what to do next, they first need him to get out of there. And then he does, and then we see him sink back into the sea, and we see the full extent of destruction.
Like a lot of shots of ruined city streets, and we see scenes of hospitals that are just taking in floods and floods of people that they just can't handle. And a lot of children, too. Again, like really intentionally hitting home how heavy this is.
And volunteering at one of these, coincidentally, is Emiko, who, of course, in the destruction, decides to tell her lover, fiance, doesn't really matter, about what she saw in Dr. Serizawa's laboratory because she knows that it could actually be effective against Godzilla because nothing else has been. So we then learn about what she saw, which was the oxygen destroyer.
And we see Dr. Serizawa having his Oppenheimer moment, complete with looking incredibly like hollow-faced and incredibly stressed out about what he has done.
He is kind of an Oppenheimer-y.
He is Cillian Murphy before Cillian Murphy is Cillian. Is it Cillian or is it Cillian?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, he is literally just I am become Death of the Destroyer fish.
Yeah, he drops a small sphere, orb, pellet, whatever, into a fish tank that is full of like wild fish.
I don't know, kind of tropically looking fish, like the sort of fish you would have in a fish tank.
Yeah, and it starts sort of bubbling up.
Bubbling.
and dissolves these fish, like literally dissolves them.
Just bones.
Yeah, in one frame they're alive, in the next frame they're just skeletons, and then they are nothing. They are dissolved further into nothing, and that's the oxygen destroyer. It is described as something he discovered accidentally while researching oxygen, and it turns oxygen molecules into liquid fluids. He says. I won't get into the science of that, but that doesn't make any
The
sense.
science doesn't exist. This is just a plot device. This is
Well, it's jargon, so it doesn't really have to.
So he is not happy that he discovered this.
And now we have the same shots again, reused for dramatic effect, of course, instead of for cost-saving measures, of Emiko screaming.
Yeah.
And, like, cowering in fear. And now we get it.
It takes me back to my elementary school science fair one time. When
Did you
no,
disintegrate fish in...
So the thing is, kind of. My project was basically like, is acid rain a thing, and is it bad for fish? Because I guess I hadn't realized at that age that acid rain stopped becoming a thing in like the 90s, and so I took a bunch of like snow melt and stuff like that, and I tried and a bunch of I think like distilled water, and I got a bunch of feeder fish from a PetSmart, and I put a bunch of fish into one tank of water and a bunch of fish into another tank of water, and of all of the fish, only one died in the acid. Only one fish died over the entire course of the experiment. But the fact that
so the conclusion is that acid rain is fake news and it doesn't matter.
Exactly. However, what is not fake news is the fact that it freaked out a bunch of other students, and so my school did have to put a ban on using live animals in the science fair experiments going forward, and that was my Oppenheimer moment.
It sure was. Anyways, since she witnessed his Oppenheimer moment, they have decided to try and go and convince him to use this weapon that he has professed to never use against anything, to use it against Godzilla. This doesn't go well. He goes into his lab and starts smashing shit. His own shit. To be clear, this is Dr. Serizawa. He's smashing his own shit because he's mad that somebody wants him to use it as a weapon.
Which is something that he has been very adamant in every possible moment that he does not want to do, and he's researching it to discover a non-violent use for it.
Yeah, no, it's the second that somebody asks him to use it as a weapon, he tries to go and destroy literally everything related to it, notes, research anything. He starts burning stuff. He has a chest full of stuff that he tries to destroy. The two of them, Emiko and Ogata, follow him down to the lab. Ogata gets in a little bit of a scuffle with him, a little bit of a fight. He's trying to stop him from destroying this chest.
Ends up cutting his forehead.
Yeah, he gets a boo-boo. No big deal.
It will be like a visual cue for the rest of the film, though.
We get a back and forth about he's not going to use it. It's the only way he can save Tokyo and mankind. He's not going to use it because it's a weapon of mass destruction. You can use it once and then never again.
His thinking is that he can destroy the research, but then foreign actors or whatever could kidnap him and then under threat of torture or whatever else force him to divulge the information because he'll still know all of his own research even if he destroys his notes and stuff.
Yeah. This goes on for a few minutes.
And then We Are the World starts playing.
Yes. Over the radio we get a large sort of prayer
in song form.
Memorial events. Plea for some sort of peace over the radio that happens to be on in Serizawa's lab. We just have a bunch of younger girls singing about the need for peace and how they would like to stop having to suffer.
And about how they'd like to buy Godzilla a Coke.
Anyway, at this point, Serizawa starts to get sad about this. Reasonable.
It's a very sad scene.
It is. It is emotionally powerful, despite us making jokes about it.
I'm just wondering how they rehearsed it that quick. Like, they were on point. Godzilla came in, destroyed everything last night, and now we've already got a song. We've got
they're
performers.
Presumably practiced chorus singers.
This scares the daylights into Serizawa, so he's like, okay, sure, we'll use it the one time. He's not that enthused about it.
And he will never be enthused about it, as we will see.
Then they let him destroy the paper research. Basically, his thought process is that the weapon is as destructive as Godzilla himself, so obviously he can't let it go anywhere. So at this point in time, the only evidence left of its existence once he's burned this is the last one that he has and is going to use against Godzilla, and what's in his head. That's the foreshadowing. You get a fade to black, and we come up to the next morning. They are on a boat again. A lot of ship scenes in this film.
I mean, it's
Love boats. I'm down for that.
a marine creature,
Yeah.
or at least a creature of marine origin. So
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense that there's a lot of boats.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So they are all in Tokyo Bay in this boat, and they are going to drop the oxygen destroyer on top of Godzilla. Serizawa asks to be put in the diving suit so that he can,
Do it himself.
he can go underwater and make sure that the device is working correctly because it needs to be deployed underwater to work correctly. That's what he says. And they argue about this. Eventually, both Ogata and Serizawa are going down.
Because Ogata is a trained diver and Serizawa is not.
Yeah, that's basically the condition that he gives into because Serizawa wants to go by himself, but he's never dived before in his life. So they find Godzilla via a Geiger counter
With some really cool, like, thalassophobia before it was cool content.
Yes, I was going to save it until we actually go under the water, but there is some really nice underwater shots here.
Yes.
I don't know if it was shot with an underwater camera or if it was in like a diving tank shot from the outside, but it looks really fucking good.
Yeah, and Godzilla is initially down there, eeping. He's tired.
He's just chilling.
Yeah, he's hanging out.
He's eepy.
He's laying down. And then they descend with, Serizawa has the oxygen destroyer. Godzilla wakes up, starts walking around. He's not really aware that the two of them are there.
And these diving suits, I may be dumb, but I am not familiar at all with the timeline of, the development of diving technology. I did not realize these diving suits were that modern. These are like the Scooby-Doo villain, where it's like the vinyl suit with like the big round like brass or whatever helmet with a tether for air.
Serizawa starts to activate the oxygen destroyer, and Ogata gets pulled back up because he just needed to assist with the dive part.
Serizawa doesn't come up.
Yeah, because he's still he needs to fully deploy the oxygen destroyer, I believe, is the pretense.
He needs to open up the demon core.
Yes.
It does kind of look like
so
that,
much
doesn't
like
it?
the demon core.
I mean, it's a metal sphere,
Yeah.
so I mean, fair enough.
He starts using it, though it starts destroying Godzilla. Ogata is, at this point, very concerned and is probably convinced that Serizawa is trying to kill himself, because he is, as Godzilla starts to dissolve and die in front of him.
And thrash about in the ocean. He rises to the surface briefly for a moment.
But that's actually after this next part.
Ah,
They start pulling him up by the oxygen lines under Ogata's order. Right before they start doing this, Serizawa pulls a knife and cuts his oxygen
Cuts
line
the
and
tether.
tether. So, and yeah, I mean, he's killing himself. That's the intent. The knowledge to create this weapon existed
only with him.
only and within him. So the only way that he saw to destroy that was to destroy himself. And so he sacrifices himself. And as that happens, Godzilla comes up to the surface, gives one more big roar, and then sinks down to the bottom of Tokyo Bay. And then we see a skeleton.
It's freaky. I don't like it.
It's kind of
It's
fucked
very
up.
unsettling.
It's unsettling. And then the skeleton disintegrates, and there's nothing left. Nothing. It's over. Godzilla is, in fact, dead.
Like, very dead.
In something that is not carried over to future films, Godzilla is dead and is not coming back in this form.
And that's something I really like about this film, and something that we will probably butt into going forward. I don't like the idea of Godzilla as being like a single continuity. I'd like to think of each film as its own like separate interpretation of the concept.
Mhm.
And so I like when Godzilla's dead at the end.
Yeah.
Like explicitly dead.
And then Yamane says, it's great that we killed this one and all, but if we don't stop above ground nuclear testing, it's likely we'll see another Godzilla, which was not sequel bait. It's just trying to give the message. But then it became sequel bait.
Right, because a year later we had...
Because he literally says it probably wasn't the last Godzilla. And then we get sort of a collective salutation of Serizawa and a mourning and thanking him for his own sacrifice, even though he didn't need to. But
it wasn't necessary,
Yeah.
but it was an emotionally moving gesture.
yes. And this was also a film from Japan in the 50s.
Imperialist Japan, yes.
Yes.
And Ogata takes off his bandage like it's a hat to put his hand on his heart and salute Serizawa.
And that's it. We see a couple more water scenes, and then then the film's over. That's the film.
We have finished Godzilla.
All right, good podcast, guys. We can wrap that up. No.
Yeah, we're done. We don't need an outro.
Well, we don't quite have an outro left to do. I mean, we've said everything we wanted to about the film already.
It is a solid monster flick.
It's emotionally powerful, and it's really well done on the monster level.
And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic in saying it's one of the most important films in modern cinematic history.
Yep. It is a formulaic film. It is a good film. It is an emotional film. It has kind of everything that you could need.
It's a formulaic film, but it's the kind of film that's only retroactively formulaic.
Yeah, that's what I was
about to say, that it created the formula.
Yeah. No, so that's the end of the film. And to segue into, we have developed a scoring system for films on this podcast.
Did we figure this out properly?
We did indeed, by which I mean I'm going to solidify it as the words come out of my mouth. We have developed a system called the scale, where we are giving two separate scores to a film, one on monster drama, one on human drama. The human drama is weighted for only half as much as the monster drama. Both scores are out of 10, but if you gave a film a 10 out of 10 on monster drama and a 5 out of 10 on human drama, it would come out to 7.5 points, basically. Where do we sit on the human scale? I should create a Google sheet for this. 1 second.
I would say that the human scale drama is... I would give it a 7, honestly, because it's dealing with serious emotions. There is a human emotional core to this movie and to the catastrophe. It doesn't do anything particularly out of the ordinary, or it doesn't take any like big leaps in terms of characterization, but what it does do, it does pretty well and pretty engagingly. So I would give it a 7, personally.
I feel very similarly, but I might bump it up to an 8, just because I feel like it's so resonant in a way that a lot of future Godzilla films wouldn't be.
Yeah, no, I would give it I would agree with Ariel on this. This gets an 8, I would say. It's very well done. There's some parts where it falls flat, not very many of them. Compared to other Godzilla films, it's phenomenal. It's pretty good. The human drama gets an 8. I would agree with that. It's emotional, it's well written, which brings us to the monster action score.
No, I think that's safe to say that that's gonna be scoring probably a bit higher.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to go higher than 8.
9.
But yeah, I'd probably put it at a 9 myself.
I would put it at a 10 because I don't know. I like monster drama better. I like the monster action better.
I guess this is a personal preference thing, but I like there to be a mixture of cities and natural landscapes, like we'll see in a lot of the Showa films going forward, where we see like plains and mountains. I like foam flocking is really what it comes down to. I like the fake grass.
That's a good take.
And I find the technical details to be absolutely fascinating behind, the creation of the different suits. But at the end of the day, I think I still have to take a little bit off for the puppet being so drastically different. I appreciate it because, for autistic reasons, but I don't know if I would qualify that as... I would qualify it as a fault overall, I guess.
Fair enough. So...
Still, a 9 is pretty fucking good, I'd say.
I would agree. I mean, I give it a 10, but a 9's still a pretty fucking good score, and we'll have plenty films that don't even come near that. So Lucy gave the human drama 7 and the monster drama a 9, which comes out to a score of 8. Makes sense. 8 out of 10.
Does it? I thought you were. What about the weighting?
That's the best weighting I could do off the top of my head.
I'm very bad at math. I'm sorry.
Would you give this film an 8 out of 10? Do you agree with giving this film an 8 out of 10?
On the scale? Yeah. Let's go with that.
Ariel, an 8 and a 9. So that comes out to 8.5. So you can round up to 9 if you want.
That's a Fellini movie.
Ariel, would you give this film a 9 out of 10 or an 8.5 out of 10 on merits?
Yes. Easily.
I gave it an 8, but also a 10, which by the math that I have given brings it a 9 out of 10, which I would agree with. The math here doesn't make too much sense, but
The points are made up, and
we all agree with the numbers that we're giving, so it actually does make sense.
the rules are made up, and the points don't matter.
Yes. So basically, we have one person gave it an 8, one person gave it a 9, and the second person gave it a 9.
Ish.
9-ish. And that sounds about right. That's where I'd put it.
Can we cross-reference that with the more popular governing bodies of film ratings?
No.
93 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Sure, that's 9 out of 10. I'll take it.
7
Fuck Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, fuck RT, fuck Letterboxd.
Letterboxd user.
The scale is the only god I recognize.
7.5 on IMDb is
Well, that's just
awful.
horseshit.
Stupider than baseline. But yes, in the total picture of all Godzilla films, we've only reviewed the one, so that puts it in first place because it's hard to knock off when the only one. But this will get more interesting later. Yeah, I think we've all agreed this is a really good film.
It is really good.
Yeah.
It deserves all the accolades it gets.
It sure
truly.
does. And you should go see it if you haven't. You can watch it for free at a good number of places.
Like your girlfriend's Plex server, apparently, if you didn't know.
We'll get into this much later, but I am also interested to see how this affects greater popular culture outside of Japan, because this film was also very impactful in America and presumably elsewhere, but particularly America with its own version of the film, which we will discuss much later, presumably.
No, I can't really give any more thoughts that I haven't really given. Anybody have anything to close on with thoughts?
Avenged Nanking.
God damn it. We can't do discourse on the first episode.
What is this? What is a podcast if not just discourse that you listen to while you're folding the laundry?
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to Queen of the Monsters. This is a podcast that is described as discourse that you're listening to while folding laundry. Anybody have anything to plug as we sign up?
I mean, we did our plugs at the beginning.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had anything else to plug.
Nah.
All right, this has been Queens of the Monsters, and my name is Maya. I'm here with Lucy and Ariel, and that's a podcast.